Russians are shelling our neighboring cities, and they are hitting with missiles and drones almost each and every evening the whole of countries. So that's why it's the issue of emergency. So we were losing people. We are losing the most precious thing that we have, it's just our people. And the comparison to the Nazis is absolutely right thing to do.
Now, Lord Cameron's direct appeal to Republicans in Congress to release more funding for Ukraine comes as Ukraine's armed forces said they'd sunk a large Russian amphibious ship, the Caesar Kunikov, off the coast of Crimea. Alexander Khara is a former advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defence. He's also former deputy head of the Department for External National Security and Defence and a fellow at the Centre for Defence Strategies. And he told me more about the sinking of the Russian ship.
We showed our ability to target Russian ships and submarines and actually the other military assets on Crimean Peninsula. So it's the type of the general idea how to fight this war. But in general, it's a part of the war. And if we're talking about the land component of the war, and particularly 2023 offensive, and it's failed to some extent for the reason that Ukraine doesn't have ability to impose the air control. We cannot control our skies. That's why we cannot apply all those pretty good strategies and doctrines of NATO of maneuverable offensive. So that's why we turn to the old-fashioned tactics that here is food. But, I repeat again and again that we are fighting the war with Russia, which all NATO, including the United States, were supposed to fight in the worst-case scenario during these 75 years of NATO.
Well, let me ask you about that funding package in the United States. We've seen the Senate giving the go-ahead for this big package of aid for a number of different countries, but a large chunk, some $60 billion worth for Ukraine. But there is concern that it could still be blocked in the House of Representatives. And we've seen the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, now urging Republicans in Congress to approve this funding package, saying they should not show the weakness displayed against Hitler in the 1930s. I mean, what do you make of that appeal and the language he's using?
Well, first of all, we highly appreciate what the United Kingdom has been doing since the beginning of the war back in 2014. While the Obama administration, Chancellor Angela Merkel, were just talking to Putin and were, restraining Ukrainian actions, the United Kingdom began to provide us with the training and There've been a lot of programs of support of Ukraine before the re-invasion in 2022. And after the re-invasion, the United Kingdom was providing us with a lot of assets, and particularly if we're talking about tanks, the Challenger tanks. They're not really useful in Ukraine in such a number, but it was really important to push Germans and Americans to provide tanks in bigger numbers.
But what about that direct appeal from Lord Cameron to Republicans? Do you think he's right to use that sort of language?
Well, I think so, because we've seen, and actually Ukraine became a sort of a domestic internal political factor in the United States back in 2016, and Trump was picking on Ukraine, and you know that the impeachment, the first impeachment was triggered by the withholding of assistance to Ukraine, and certainly recently, in a couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of propaganda, misjudgment, and just lies about Ukraine on the part of the, MAGA crowd around Trump and himself. And that's why it's really important to exert some pressure on the representatives in the House that they are not blocking it for the reason because they decided to give up on Ukraine. And if they give up on Ukraine, they can give up on any other countries, and other nations would not be safe, understanding that there is no leadership of the United States, and the United States may, at the whim of one guy, just give up supporting Ukraine. So I hope certainly there is a possibility of the House to pass this legislation. They have this discharge petition procedure, but I believe that they can come up with a better solution of bipartisan vote on this issue if there is no, let's say, influence of the destructive influence of Mr. Trump, who wants to give up on Ukraine, who wants to keep the southern border open, with him to blame the Biden administration, because he wants to get back to the White House.
Yes, Lord Cameron is saying directly in his article for The Hill in Washington, saying Britain and America's joint history shows the folly of giving in to tyrants in Europe who believe in redrawing boundaries by force. Do you think that perhaps this is a moment when such language is justified, as he tries to persuade those wavering Republicans to give the go-ahead for that funding for Ukraine?
Well, I think it's the right language and at the right time, and I understand that we can face Mr. Trump after November elections, and certainly it will be absolutely different story. But now our guys in the front line are short of shells, and certainly with this assistance, there will be less casualties of our soldiers, and certainly less casualties of our civilians. The Russians are shelling our neighboring cities, and they are hitting with missiles and drones almost each and every evening the whole of country. So that's why it's the issue of emergency. So we were losing people. We are losing the most precious thing that we have, it's just our people. And the comparison to the Nazis is absolutely right thing to do.
So it is vital for Ukraine to get this additional funding now from the United States.
Yeah, that's right. If we have a look at what our Western partners are doing, the European Union is doing a lot. And the European partners are doing a lot. By the way, Germany on the third place and the United Kingdom on the fourth place. But we cannot compare all the industrial capacity of these countries and what they have in stockpiles to provide us immediately with what we need. With the Americans, with the arsenal of democracy, with what they have and they can produce. So that's why it's really important right now to save lives of our soldiers and civilians. And it's important as a signal to Putin that his ideas that somehow he can destroy the unity between the Europeans or non-Europeans and transatlantic unity, which is the main goal of all those activities and all those useful idiots in the United States, including in the House, who are trying to undermine this support.
Well, that was Alexander Khara, former advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, speaking to me just a little earlier.